Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Bible Talk from the Green Room. We are in week number 14 of our journey through the Bible here. This week, we're going to be in the book of Esther. That is a book, I'll have to say, I have never studied until today. It says the timeline of this happens between chapter 6 and 7 in the book of Ezra, and it's named after the principal character, Esther, which means star. Says God's name is not mentioned in this whole chapter, but his presence can be felt in the lines. And some believe that his name is absent from this book because it had to pass through Persian censorship and it may have been removed there. In the last lesson we learned, we were talking about the study of Ezra and Nehemiah, and it told us that the remnant who returned to Jerusalem and Judah. However, the events of the book of Esther actually take place in Persia. That was the land of captivity. The number of Jews who stayed in Persia far outnumbered those who returned to Jerusalem. Book of Esther records how the Hebrew race was saved from extinction. God had carefully protected his chosen people for centuries so that the promised Redeemer could come through the seed of Abraham there. He could not allow them to be wiped out. To prevent disaster, God actually used Esther here to save his people. This book's broken down into 4 sections here. Chapters 1 and 2 talks about Esther becoming the king. It says Vashti is the king of Persia as the feast is taking place in the beautiful garden of King Ahasuerus' palace. On the 7th day of the feast, the king had run out of entertainment. So what he did is he ordered his wife to show her beauty, and I don't think that turned out too well for him. Said Vashti refused to cooperate, and the king was embarrassed in front of so many people. In his anger, he asked advisors what to do, and what was done was they said they would make a decree giving the queen's position to someone better than she. So what happens is the king appoints officers to go out and gather beautiful young women from all over the kingdom and let him choose one. Now, how crazy is that? Esther, who had been adopted by her cousin Mordecai, enters the contest. Esther was very beautiful there, and she was chosen to replace Vashti as a queen. Vashti, I pronounce it that way. Some people pronounce it Vashti. But I lived near what was called the Vashti House in Thomasville, Georgia. It was an old cigar factory that was converted to a children's home. That's how they pronounced it. Thus, I'm in the habit of pronouncing it that way. The act that Mordecai performs here, he performs a commendable act. He prevented the king from being murdered. So then we run into chapters 3 and 4, and that's the plot of Haman here. In these chapters, we read of the success of a man named Haman. He becomes the equivalent of the prime minister of Persia. Position gives him the highest rank in the land next to the king. Haman's success becomes a disaster rather than a blessing. Haman was a little man in a big position, it says. He cannot overlook one little Jew, Mordecai, will not bow down to him. A man of high position and dignity should have overlooked the disrespect of one poor Jew, but Haman's pride is hurt, so he retaliates, and he says that he wants to destroy all the Jews, beginning with Mordecai. He promotes king, set a day on which disloyal subjects will be exterminated, and offers the king a bribe. If he would just authorize the killing of the Jews. Thus the king signs a decree ordering the Persians to destroy the Jews on the 13th day of the first month and then take all of their property. Mordecai sends Esther a copy of this decree so she can see how desperate the situation is here. Then all of us should consider this question it says here, because it talks about, he adds, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And that's chapter 4, verse 14. And then the study book asks a question. It says, all of us should consider this. Why has God put me in this place at this time? God has a specific purpose for us. We might not understand it prior to going into it, we might not understand it while we're in it. And sometimes it's not revealed to many years down the road, and then we understand why things happen the way they happen. As we look back and we reflect on what went on, we can see God's hand in our lives. So don't lose faith. Don't get discouraged when you're in situations, because if you are living in the will of the Lord, at some point you will see what was going on there and how God was working in your life. When we get to chapter 5, which is the third section, it calls it Esther's intercession. Esther, in contrast to Haman, has not been spoiled by her high position. Although she's the queen of Persia, she's not forgotten her cousin Mordecai. So she does what has to be done with great courage. She approached the king, but did not reveal her request immediately. Instead, she invited the king and wicked Haman to a banquet. During the banquet, the king noticed something troubling Esther and asked her about it. However, Esther wisely tells the king she's going to make her request known the next day. And then when Haman gets home, he brags to his friends and his wife about the riches, the children, the promotion of the king, and being invited to the exclusive party by the queen. Well, Haman, with his position and favor and the money and with the king there, there's one thing that stood between him and happiness: Mordecai. He still refused to bow down to Haman at this time. So at the suggestion of Haman's friends, there was a gallows built in which to hang Mordecai. So now we roll into the fourth section of this, chapter 6 through 10 here. It says, on the first day of the banquet, the king couldn't sleep, so he called for his royal chronicles to be read to him. And they came in and they read, and the portion that is read contains information furnished by Mordecai, leading to the arrest and execution of the king's would-be assassins here. Immediately, the king wants to know what has to be done to repay Mordecai for such a great service. Well, what we get to here in the notes is Haman puts the king's robe on Mordecai, puts him on the king's horse, and leads him through the streets on a parade there on horseback, proclaiming the king's pleasure with him. That's a great turn of events there. On the second day of Esther's banquet for the king and Haman, she has the opportunity to reveal Haman's plot to kill Mordecai as well as all the Jews in Persia. It says, when Esther tells King Haman tells the king Haman has deceived him into making a decree to exterminate all the Jews in the land, and she would also be exterminated. So what the king does, he orders Haman to be hung on the gallows that he built for Mordecai. Now that is definitely a change of events there. And this talks about an allusion of a biblical principle found in Proverbs 11:8. It says, the righteous is delivered out of trouble, and the wicked comes in his stead. A Persian king's decree could not be changed according to the rule back at this time. So the decree for the Jews' massacre could not be reversed. That decree was still there. But in place of that, what the king does is he made another decree that the Jews could protect themselves and slay anyone that attacked them. And this allowed them to counter that prior decree there. The book of Esther closes with the appointment of Mordecai to the position that had been held by Haman there. And that description it talks about the Feast of Purim in chapters 9 verses 20 to 27 there. And that Feast of Purim is still celebrated by Jews to this day. It commemorated the deliverance of the Jews from the destruction of the Persians. It was basically a Thanksgiving day for the Jewish people, and they still celebrate it today. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I learned quite a bit there. I hope you have a great weekend. Remember, put a focus on mental health every day with your family, with your friends, at work, and out in the community. Make time to do a self-check-in and ask those around you if they're okay. Be available to talk. Y'all have a good weekend. Thanks again for tuning in. I love you all. We'll talk to you tomorrow.